Hey guys, it's Michael from Gredio. Welcome to the third course. This is where we really get into the meat of how to calculate your food product cost for food business startups, or maybe you're launching a new product if you're already a business owner. And we'll walk through a couple different examples and we'll just jump right in. So your shelf price is determined with your product costs, then you take a margin, your distributor then takes a margin, and then your retailer takes a margin, and then you ultimately are determining what your customer is going to pay on the shelf. So we're going to walk through that whole example in the next couple slides. Your product cost influences a lot of other numbers. It influences what you sell your product for, what your customer is ultimately going to pay for your product. And it's also the most volatile number that you work with because it always changes. You're buying ingredients at different prices. You're buying packaging, labels. Your labor rate is constantly changing if you're renting a kitchen, paying a team of people. And all these changes need to be tracked. It's super important because you need to make sure that you're making the margin you need to make to be successful. And it will establish later that that's 40 to 60% margins. So you're able to cover your operating costs and any promotions. And if at a point you're not earning that margin, you need to determine whether you should increase your price, or maybe if you're decreasing your margin or you're decreasing your product cost enough, you may be able to decrease your price on the shelf. Included in your product cost are things like raw materials and ingredients, all of your packaging, jars, lids, labels, shrink bands, shrink sleeves. If you buy a box to pack all of your containers into, that box is divided by the number of units in that box, so that's also included. Labor, you have to pay yourself, as we've discussed in past classes. You could add some operating costs, like driving to the kitchen and whatnot, into your product costs. I consider those operational though. And don't forget to include shipping in your product costs, because 100 pounds of blueberries plus shipping is a different product cost than if you just went to get 100 pounds of blueberries. A couple of product cost tips. Your ingredients should be less than packaging for glass items. So this means that all the ingredients that go into your recipe should cost less than the glass or plastic you're putting it in, which are kind of a rough rule I've determined throughout launching new food products. You do have different costs for different sizes. Whether you're making 4 ounces, 9 ounces, 32 ounces, or a gallon, all of those costs are completely different. It's not just one cost. So a gallon's obviously going to be more expensive than if you're making 4-ounce container. And then the trick that I mentioned in an earlier class, if you multiply by your product cost by 4, you do arrive at a rough estimate of what your product is going to cost on the shelf. So an example we use, I really like fudge sauce apparently, so we're going to use Sally's fudge sauce, and I need to calculate my product cost. So first you've got ingredient costs. You want to list all of your ingredients in the left column here, price them out, convert them to grams. That gives you the dollar per gram. And then in the second to last column, you list the amount of grams in your recipe. You could do pounds too, I use grams. And then you ultimately get your amount per batch of each ingredient. So your chocolate is $2.70 a batch. Your butter is $2, and we can go on. Sugar and whatnot. You want to do that for all the ingredients in your recipe. Total up all the ingredients, and then you get your ingredient cost per batch. Divide those ingredients by the number of units that your recipe produces. So in this example, we'll fast forward a little bit. You get an ingredient cost of 40 cents. You do the same idea for your packaging costs. So in my hot fudge, I've got a jar, a lid, and a label. In this scenario, the box that my glass comes in is, I already pay for it ahead of time. So we're not going to add in that cost. You get a price per unit for a jar, lid, and label, and then you total those up. So in this example, our packaging cost is 60 cents per unit. Then you want to calculate your labor costs. I used 3 different examples of how many units you can produce in an 8-hour day, and a labor rate of just me kind of hanging out in a kitchen at $15 an hour. As you can see in the right column, your labor per unit goes down as you produce more units. So you want to figure out A, well, what are you paying yourself? And B, what machines do I need to help me make more product? And in this example, we're going to move forward with our labor cost being 34 cents a unit. So then you get your total product cost. You add up your ingredients, your packaging, and your labor, and you have $1.34 in this example. Then you have your margin. As I said earlier, you're looking for a margin of 40 to 60%. So we used 40, 50, and 60. And then you take your cost of goods, which is $1.34, divided by 1 minus your margin. And margin in this case is a decimal. So if your margin is 60%, it's $1.34 divided by 1 minus 0.6, which is and then $1.34 divided by 0.4. This is your price to a distributor. So in this example, we're going to use the 50% margin, and you get a $2.68 price to your distributor, and you make $1.34 on that price. Then your distributor takes that $2.68, they add on a margin, typically 25 to 30%. More often nowadays, it's 30%. All of my distributors are at 30% right now. And then you arrive at different prices to the retailer. You use this to take your distributor costs divided by 1 minus your margin. Again, it's a decimal point, so it's 1 minus 0.3 in this example. And then the price that your distributor is going to sell to a retailer is $3.83. This is also the price that you would use to sell to a retailer if you're skipping the distributor. Because that way you've got a product that costs $1.34 and you're pricing it to retailer for $3.83. So you're making a higher margin by eliminating the distributor. But you still want to use the same price so that you don't undercut your distributor and sell more product ultimately through either you as a company or your distributor. Then your distributor is going to sell that product to a retailer. So the retailer's cost is $3.83 right now. You want to take the $3.83 divided by 1 minus their margin. So a bigger grocery store will take closer to a 30 to 35% margin. As you work your way into bigger retail, it's 40 to 50%. The 50% is typically those really small boutique gift shops. And as you'll notice, the price of the retailer, depending on their margin, is going to change. So the retailer is going to hover, $5.47, $6.38, $7.66. Well, those are weird numbers for a retailer. So in that last column, the price on the shelf is going to get rounded. So $5.47 becomes $5.49, $6.38 becomes $6.49. They make a little bit higher margin. And $7.66, becomes $7.99. So the product that you are making for $1.34 is being sold to a consumer for $8. Now, when you do a farmer's market or you do something, craft fair or an art show, wherever you're selling your food, this is the price that you want to sell to a consumer, direct to the consumer. So you would sell it for $8. $1.34 goes up to $8. You have this margin because it costs you money to be at these events. It costs you, the booth fee, it costs you the hotel, the travel, all the other travel expenses and meals. You need those margins to cover those extra expenses, and you make a lot more money. And just to mention real quick, broker's margin, as I mentioned in the last class, it's typically 3 to 8% of sales. Depends on who they sell to. And that doesn't include the monthly retainer. When you're starting up with a food broker, you can pay anywhere from $300 up to $3,000 a month to retain a food broker, depending on the accounts they go after. And again, you don't have to work with food brokers. I personally don't work with them right now as of this recording, but you can work with them to help get into a larger retail landscape. So here's a summary of pricing. We started all the way back at the beginning with a product cost of $1.34. That product was then sold to a distributor for $2.68. The distributor sells that product to a retailer for $3.83, and then the consumer ends up buying it for $7 to $8, depending on the store you're in. On the right is your gross profit margin when you sell to each channel. So you make $1.34 per unit when you sell to a distributor. You make $2.49 when you sell to a retailer. And when you sell direct to a consumer, you make $6.66 a unit. This is why people start at farmers markets, because you can get the biggest margin and the biggest bang for your buck. So if we take those numbers and you sell 10,000 units, that's just kind of super small. You sell 10,000 units to a distributor, it's $26,000 worth of sales, and you profit $13,400. Retailer, $38,000 in sales, you profit almost $25,000. Then if you sold all 10,000 units direct to the consumer for $8 a piece, you make $80,000, profiting $66,600. There's a couple caveats to this chart. Not everything is going to get sold through specifically one channel. You're going to sell through a mix of channels, maybe one or two distributors, a handful of retailers, and you sell to consumers at events. So your profit isn't going to be, kind of siloed. It's just going to be a mix. Ideally, if you sold direct to consumer, those 10,000 units over the year, you'd make a pretty good living, $66,600. Again, that is gross profit. Then you have your operating costs. Depending on what you use to operate your business, might not be that expensive. It could be $15,000 to $20,000, and then your net becomes about $40,000. So a little extra money on the side. But if you sell those 10,000 units to a consumer, and then on top of that, you've got retailers and distributors, you can make a pretty good, small lifestyle business.